Hello, you're watching Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel on the 17th of November. In today's programme, we report on the topical issue of whether it's appropriate to ban an employee from wearing a poppy as a mark of respect at work. We'll also look at a case commenting on whether a dismissal can be fair for a different reason to that relied on by the employer. And finally, another recent tribunal decision touching on whether an employee can be fairly dismissed for behaving inappropriately outside of work. A topical decision was handed down by the Employment Tribunal recently on whether it's acceptable for an employer to ban an employee from wearing a poppy at work. Poppies are typically worn as a mark of respect from All Souls Day on the 2nd of November to Remembrance Sunday. And in this case, Mr. Lisk, an ex-serviceman, said that his employer, Shield Guardian, banned him from wearing a poppy at work when he had done so for a number of years previously. Consequently, he submitted a religion or belief discrimination claim to an employment tribunal, and in doing so he referred to the well-known test in the Nicholson and Granger case that we commented on in more detail in our news programme on the 14th of December last year. Dave Rintoul, an associate in our employment team, comments on this case in more detail.
At the preliminary tribunal hearing in this case, the employment judge considered whether Mr. Lisk's belief that we should pay our respects to those who have given their lives for us by wearing a poppy during Remembrance Day week amounted to a philosophical belief under the Equality Act. He referred to the well-known test in the 2010 case of Nicholson and Granger and said that he regards the 2nd to the 11th of November as a period of mourning, in the same way that a Christian would observe Lent. He also argued that it was his obligation to wear a poppy as a mark of respect, which is widespread in the UK and abroad, and this doesn't conflict with anybody else's rights. However, the tribunal found that Mr. Lisk's belief wasn't capable of protection under the Equality Act. It's only an employment tribunal decision and so isn't binding, but nevertheless it's another useful case for employers, indicating the current views of the tribunal on what constitutes a philosophical belief. The judge in this case said that Mr. Lisk's alleged belief failed the Granger test as it lacked the required characteristics of cogency, cohesion and importance, and it couldn't fairly be described as relating to a weighty and substantial aspect of human life and behaviour. Overall, it's an encouraging decision for employers who may feel that the floodgates are opening in terms of what constitutes a philosophical belief under the regulations. This follows the recent tribunal decisions in Hashman, where a belief in anti-fox hunting was capable of protection, and Maestri and the BBC, where a belief in the higher purposes of public service broadcasting was also capable of protection. So it really goes to show that it's difficult for employees and employers alike to know which beliefs are covered by the legislation and which are not.
Thanks, Dave. If you have any queries on this issue, please feel free to contact us either through your usual Addleshaw Goddard contact or by clicking on the Contact Us box to the right of the screen. Next up, we have a useful Employment Appeal Tribunal decision in the Screen and Seatwave case, confirming that a tribunal was entitled to find that an employee had been fairly dismissed for a different statutory reason to the one relied on by the employer. The key point here being that this change in reasoning caused no prejudice to the employee. Again, Dave comments on what this case means for employers.
Here, the tribunal found that Seatwave Limited had fairly dismissed Mr. Screen for conduct reasons, although the company had actually pleaded capability as the reason for Mr. Screen's dismissal in its defence and at the hearing. The Employment Appeal Tribunal agreed with the tribunal's approach, given that the decision to dismiss in this case, whether it was labelled as a conduct or capability dismissal, was on exactly the same set of facts, and Mr. Screen had suffered no prejudice as a result. So the decision indicates that an employer is not always tied to the label it happens to use in its defence. But, a note of caution, the employer was fortunate in this case, and so we'd continue to recommend that employers carefully consider whether an employee's error at work is a misconduct or a capability issue before commencing any formal procedure against them. But if in doubt, one option is to rely on a second reason in the alternative to cover all bases.
Thanks, Dave. And finally, another tribunal decision in the news this week. Mrs. Bray, a prison teacher at Her Majesty's Prison Brinsford, was fairly dismissed after auditioning for the X Factor in a fairly revealing outfit. However, this was not the sole reason for her dismissal being fair. Since being suspended for her behaviour on The X Factor, she'd also failed to tell her employer that she'd set up a provocative personal website. Also, the fact that she was in a position of trust as she taught life skills and literacy to young male prison inmates had an important bearing on her employer's decision to dismiss. So, a useful reminder overall for employers dealing with misconduct dismissals to consider whether the dismissal is reasonable in all of the circumstances and to look at all of the facts in the round. Please see our programme published in October on misconduct dismissals, which includes practical advice and guidance on dealing with misconduct disciplinary and dismissal procedures. So, that's all for today from Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.